Today is all about talking and how to make your dialogue sound realistic, interesting, and meaningful in your stories. Everyone loves dialogue. We love witty banter. We love characters talking. Dialogue is a huge make or break in a book. So it's important that you get it correct. So let's go over some tips on how to write good dialogue. Obviously, you want to write dialogue that is realistic, but what does that mean? So it means that people are going to talk the way that normal people talk. They're not going to add in extra descriptives that you want in a normal conversation. A big example of that is like the as you knows. If you were ever writing in dialogue, well, as you know, I would say 99.9% of the time you would want to cut that out because that you're about to make a mistake. People in real life don't say, well, as you know, yesterday we did this as part of an exposition dump. It's just not realistic. It's always a big flag that your dialogue is going to be off and that you need to figure out how to do your exposition a little bit differently. It's a very common problem, so if you find yourself with this in your manuscript, don't get discouraged. One big thing I see is repeating narrative info with dialogue. For example, if the narrator says they were outnumbered, and then someone immediately screams, "We're outnumbered." In most cases, you actually want to cut the narrative part of this out and leave the dialogue, but you don't want to state something in the narrative and then immediately state it in dialogue. It While that doesn't affect the realism of dialogue, it does affect the reader flow and and the quality of your writing. So go through and make sure you kind of cut those out. Pick one or the other. Now, this one's tricky. Uh, it has to do with exposition. This one's a little tricky to get right, but for the most part, when it comes to exposition, you want to try to reveal as much of that through dialogue as possible without the as you know statements. That's where it kind of gets tricky. You want characters to be able to talk things out and the reader to learn information that way instead of paragraphs of info dumps. Um, Exposition would have to be its own video because it is once again very tricky. Even experienced authors have a hard time with it. It's something you're probably going to edit 1,000 times before you publish. So, for an example of this, let's say, oh, the orcs are coming. Instead of saying in a long descriptive paragraph, the orcs were coming, you would maybe have a character run in and be like, the orcs, they're on their way, right? You reveal information through the dialogue as much as possible. Or instead of stating a character, like, oh, that character is aloof, or people perceive them to be weird, you could reveal this through dialogue where characters are like, oh, they're a little strange, or oh, they're too good to hang out with everybody, right? You can reveal information of what is true or what just other characters think through the dialogue versus putting it in the paragraphs. One of the most important things when it comes to writing realistic dialogue. So I promised you realistic dialogue. Anyway, one of the most important things about that is adding subtext. So subtext is when people say things that they don't necessarily mean, or there's the underlying statement behind it. For example, hey, hun, how are you doing? I'm fine. The words I'm fine don't match how they actually feel. This is a very kind of broadly painted subtext. It can also be used in like flirting or arguments. A lot of times people don't outright say what they want. Which can also be another fun part of dialogue is that if you do have one character who just does say what they mean and mean what they say, looking at you, fellow neurodivergent, um, they'll stand out more compared to the other characters because they're like, I'm being honest. And then you can also have the other characters thinking, oh, what do they really want? Being confused, thinking they're having subtext. But as a general rule of thumb, for most of your characters, there should be a subtext there. Most people don't say what they really mean. For example, let's say, "Oh, do you like that guy?" No, not really. I mean, he's kind of good looking, but right? Odds are they might actually like the person and they don't want to really say it out loud, but they kind of hint that there are some amicable qualities. These are kind of example of a subtext. So if every character is always saying what they mean, It's not realistic. Okay, dialogue tags. I've heard said is dead. They taught this at a middle school that I worked at, and I was about to roll over in my grave that I'm not in. Said is not dead. Said is a good, almost invisible word. When readers read the word said, they kind of just, it doesn't really stand out, doesn't break the flow. Most of the time, you're not going to replace said with other words. Once in a while, it's good. It does work. It helps it pop. But for the most part, I honestly advocate for removing as much dialogue tags as you can. So if you can just remove said and it makes sense, do so. This also helps with getting rid of adverbs. So if you're finding you have a lot of words ending in ly, she said sadly, right? It helps you get rid of those if you get rid of the dialogue tags altogether and instead replace it with action. So if you want to say she was sad, show that she was sad. She said it as she slumped, right? Or she said it her eyes glistening with tears. Give a physical descriptor instead of that adverb, and that'll really enhance your dialogue. Also helps with body language. Okay, so body language conveys a lot of information about a person. And it kind of goes back to that subtext too. If someone's like, I'm fine, and they put their hands on their hips or they scowl, there's some body language to show that they're not actually fine. Or they say, yeah, I'm so sad, she said with a smile, right? You can convey sarcasm using body language instead of saying they said sarcastically. You show that their body language doesn't match the words. Right, so you want to make dialogue different between characters. You want to be able to tell who's talking without necessarily having to say who it is. Now, granted, a lot of your characters aren't going to be super different, but it should be different enough. I shouldn't read a line and be like, is that the main female character or the main male character? Changing up dialogue can really help make characters pop. You can have one who speaks more formally, and that informs kind of their background and who they are, and it makes them stand out compared to the others. You'd have someone who uses less proper language. You have someone who speaks maybe very unconfidently, maybe someone's boastful. Really show the personality through their words, and it'll help the characters stand out from one another and make your dialogue more realistic and more fun to read. All right, so unless you're trying to write something that is going to blow up and fizzle out really fast, which can be a valid way to write, I do advise leaving out modern slang in your books, even if you're writing something that is set in today's modern world. Especially with social media and the internet, our slang evolves so fast compared to in the past that by the time you publish it, it's going to be outdated. It also, speaking of outdated, it dates your book really bad. Which, if you are writing a book set in the past and you want to use groovy, slang terms that were popular in that particular decade, that's fine because you're writing it in a historical context. But if you're trying to write something that's going to be contemporary, you want it to stay contemporary for as long as possible, which means leaving out the slang. And if you're writing specifically because I love fantasy and that's my fantasy and sci-fi are what I really like, leave the modern slang out of it. It doesn't match most fantasy vibes and it dates really fast. As for sci-fi, if you want slang, come up with your own. That could be fun. Like that, there are whole other slang that is in their time and that relates to their culture. All right, when it comes to dialogue and fight scenes, you really want to keep dialogue to a minimum. Most people aren't going to be chatting during a fight. The exception here is if you've got your little witty, often comic relief characters, but even then, it's going to be short sentences. They're not going to have a long monologue. They're going to say something witty and get back to the fighting. So typically, dialogue and fight scenes, short, sweet, to the point. Now, sometimes no dialogue is more powerful than dialogue, especially if you're having a scene that it has a lot of emotional weight to it. A lot of times when people are grieving or they're really upset, words don't convey how they feel. And a lot of times people don't feel like speaking. So you could have a character that is going through some hardship, they're grieving, and you can show another character really caring about them without putting in dialogue. You could have a whole scene where it's just them being quiet and one sits down with the other and just like really sits with them, or, holds their hand, leans on their shoulder. Like, you could put these other descriptors in that would really sell that scene in that moment more than if they were talking. So sometimes evaluate, is dialogue really needed in this scene? Or would it be more realistic and or more impactful to cut it? Now, here's one I see a lot is the dreaded white void that you probably have heard about, or you will, the people talking about the dreaded white void. This happens when you have a lot of dialogue where characters are going back and talking, and you kind of lose all sense of the scene and what these people are doing. They may as well just be floating in a white background. Adding those action tags helps with that because they'll be speaking and interacting with the environment and doing things. Um, and the interacting with the environment is going to be the big part about avoiding the white void. So characters are going to be chatting, and at the same time, they're going to fidget with maybe a napkin, or they're going to get up and pace over to the wardrobe. Perhaps they're going to sit down in the dining chair, right? So most people don't sit rigid and just not move for a long time talking. They're going to like smoke a cigar. They're gonna do something, crack their knuckles, maybe have a fidgety character, right? Add them in. Give us fidgety people some love. Um, but anyway, they're going to interact with their environments while they're talking. That's realistic. And you want to add that into the narrative. One, for that realism, and two, to avoid the white void. So remember, your big friends here are going to be diversifying your dialogue, adding that subtext and the body language, and those kind of descriptors of what the characters are doing while talking. I almost forgot about meaningful dialogue. All right, in real life, we have a lot of conversations that are nonsense or don't lead to anything at all. These kind of conversations you want to cut out of your book. It might be realistic, but you are writing fiction. There are conventions that go with stories that aren't going to necessarily 100% match up with life. So every piece of dialogue should convey more than one thing. Should convey at least character personalities, information. It should give exposition, or it should give foreshadowing. There should always be something that the dialogue is adding to the story, and preferably more than one thing. So if you read a scene, and even if the dialogue is amazing and you love this scene, keep it as a fun extra if it doesn't add to the actual story. You can post on a website or in a newsletter, be like, hey, here's a fun deleted scene that really didn't contribute to the story, so I had to get cut. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of it altogether, but it doesn't need to be in the book. Every scene sets an expectation for the reader, and if it's not going to check off boxes for those expectations, it's got to get cut. And that's the big thing for meaningful dialogue. All right, a good tip to see how your dialogue is flowing: grab a buddy and you guys exchange the lines. One of you is a character, the other's another character. Grab a third buddy if you've got three people in the scene. Have them talk it out and see if it flows naturally. If something seems stilted or just a little off, highlight it, mark it down, and fix it. Maybe even have your buddy ad lib. I'm a writer. Have your buddy ad lib a line. They might be able to come up with something that you're like, oh, 100% I'm taking that, or oh, that sparks an idea. So if you got any tips or tricks for dialogue, or if there's something that I didn't cover, please let me know. Or if you have a specific question, leave it in the comments and I will do my best to get back to you, or even make a video covering just that topic. If you enjoy my work, like and subscribe. Whatever you do, do as if working for the Lord, so always strive for that excellence in all of your writing. Bye.